There are a lot of people on YouTube that love to claim that they have all of these underrated gems only to go on to suggest stuff like Dave the Diver or Balatro, stuff that everybody already knows about. But I approach things differently here, because my goal is to highlight literally underrated gems, and by literally underrated, I mean like under 500 reviews on Steam. Because once a game crosses that threshold, it typically starts to pop up on a lot more people's radars. But that's not the only qualifying factor to land in this video. They also have to have at least an 85% rating on Steam, and a lot of them have a rating way higher than that. That's just to say that these games are well liked by those who have played them. Also, keep in mind, if one game on this video doesn't grab you, make sure you stick around, because this video is packed with a ton of variety, so there's bound to be something here that's perfect for you, and you probably haven't even heard of it yet. This video is designed to be the ultimate version of my underrated game series for 2024. So to start off, I'm going to be getting into stuff that I haven't even covered here yet, and this is going to be the first time I talk about it. But then after those, I'll be going over the best of what I've already spotlighted in 2024. But this isn't going to be just a lazy recut of my previous videos. All of this has been recorded and edited especially for this one. So buckle down and get your wishlist ready for an absolutely ridiculous wave of truly underrated gems on Steam. Gravitorium is a super cool puzzle platformer, but instead of jumping, you end up rotating the world around you, so you kind of use gravity to help you solve the puzzles. It's a different way to tackle these tricky levels and solve puzzles, and the pixel art's great, the music's catchy, so if you're looking for a cool, solid puzzle platformer, this is definitely worth taking a look at. Flowstone Saga is a neat take on the RPG genre with a unique Tetris-style battle system. So you'll end up fighting monsters, but you'll do it by landing line blocks and chaining combos. It's got all the stuff that you'd expect out of a classic-style RPG, like the charming characters and pixel art, just with this really neat Tetris-style twist. So if you're into RPGs and love Tetris like me, then this is a really nice treat. One Button Bosses is a challenging bullet hell game, but like it says in the title, you just play it with one button. And I'd say that since it is such a simple way of playing the game, that it really does fall on you when you end up messing up. You'll need to time your button presses perfectly to dodge attacks and defeat the titular bosses. So if you're looking for a simple, straightforward challenge, make sure you at least add this one to your wishlist. Garbanzo Quest is another bullet hell game, but this time it's in the form of a platformer where you use your spit as a weapon. You can even play it in co-op if you want to play through this game with a buddy. But the main appeal here is just its really wacky vibes. It's got a great offbeat soundtrack and a real fun lighthearted vibe, so if you're looking for a new challenging platformer that has a pretty fun sense of humor, this is a really good one. Next up is Fallen Leaf, which is an 8-bit style platformer that reminds me a lot of classic Mega Man. The hook to this one though is that there are a ton of unlockable characters with unique abilities. You jump around and shoot stuff like you might expect in a game like this, but it has so much variety to it. This one could be a perfect hit of nostalgia, especially if you have a love for the Blue Bomber. Turbo Kid is a game that I covered a lot on this channel, but somehow I haven't talked about it as a part of this underrated game series yet. but it's a really awesome BMX Metroidvania based on an indie movie of the same name. You ride your bike around to explore the wasteland, so it adds a pretty cool twist of like a Trials element to the Metroidvania genre. Also, it has a lot of this over-the-top brutality to its pixel arts and animation, the soundtracks, you know, the 80s kind of catchy soundtrack, and, you know, if you're into that sort of throwback, violent, post-apocalyptic vibe, make sure you check this one out. Tobla Divine Path is a Portal-style first-person puzzle game that reminds me of like the Talos Principle stylistically, but ultimately you're going to be using physics to solve all of these puzzles, while this goddess talks over you kind of like a GLaDOS-style banter, and I think it's shockingly polished for a game that's so underrated. So if you're looking for a solid, short, first-person puzzle game, make sure you check out Tobla. Super Magbot is a solid platformer where you use your magnetic abilities to push and pull yourself around instead of jumping. The feel of this one is just super tight, and it makes moving around the environment just really fun. So if you're looking for another solid, polished platformer, Super Magbot could be the perfect game for you. Lifeslide is a super relaxing game where you play as a paper airplane that's flying through the air through these really stunning landscapes. It reminds me of Flower in a lot of ways, and it's really just a great game to unwind with. So if you need a game that's going to be really nice to look at and calm down with, Lifeslide could fill that role. Reverie is a classic top-down kind of Zelda adventure game, minus the combat, where you're in this dreamlike world and you talk to a bunch of different mysterious, quirky NPCs, and you kinda do like a trading quest like you might expect. But that's not all you'll do here. You'll be solving puzzles and trying to figure out really what's going on. This could be a great game if you're a fan of like Undertale, but you're just looking to kind of have the more NPC interaction parts be the highlight of the game. Graviators is a super fun, chaotic, sports-style game that's set in space. It's kind of like a space shooter, but it's really more like Pong. When I've played this game with my friends, it's always really fun to play this really basic Pong-style game where you can affect the ball's trajectory by putting down these like gravity wells that can throw off which way it's going. And I think the simplicity of that mode is super fun, but that's not the only thing here to it. That's just the one that I'm really mostly familiar with. There's a lot to this game, and I think that this could be a really great game for you and your friends the next time you guys hang out. Sensorium is a first-person adventure-style, sort of Myst meets Portal kind of game, where you're exploring this mysterious world, where each section and all of the puzzles are themed around the different human senses. As you might expect, there are some human senses that don't quite transition into a flat-screen 2D video game, kind of like smell and touch and stuff like that, but they find good solutions like representing smells with colors and maybe vibrating the screen for certain feelings. But it's a really nice world to kind of exist in for a bit. Visually, it reminds me a lot of like Antichamber, so if you're looking for a game along those lines, make sure you check this one out. No Parachute is a fast-paced free-fall of a game where you're a skydiver and, like it says, you're falling without a parachute. So you're going to be constantly dodging all of these different obstacles as you hurtle down this never-ending tunnel. It's one of those kind of one more try kind of games where you'll find yourself getting really sucked into just seeing how much further you can get. So if you're looking for a game that will give you a good sense of speed, there's No Parachute. Bunny Hill is a chaotic snow sports style racing game where all of the slopes are completely procedurally generated. So you'll be hurtling down in the snow and you'll never really know exactly what to expect, and that's just bolstered by its completely physics-driven gameplay. You can play with up to 8 people locally or online, and you can play as a ton of different characters, so if you're looking for like a chaotic throwback to something like Snowboard Kids, Bunny Hill could satisfy that itch. Titan Station is this sci-fi walking sim where you're on this lonely space station, and it has a really fantastic atmosphere. You play as David, who is a systems operator, and you'll be having a lot of different people talking to you over the radios, but you don't really know who to trust and what exactly is going on. So you'll be exploring the station and solving puzzles to figure out the mysterious conspiracy. The real standout thing about this game is its retro-futuristic look. It really takes a lot stylistically from movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Alien with its like padded hallways, and I really love that look. So if you're a huge sci-fi dork like me and like a good mystery, this could be a cool game for you. Destructure Among Debris is a chaotic Mad Max meets air hockey game where you smash a puck of destruction into these post-apocalyptic settlements. It has super fast-paced, mouse-based gameplay, and it's just satisfying to blast these settlements apart. The game structurally is kind of like a roguelike, where in between each settlement you destroy, you can start to pick up different perks and change the way that your run will feel. So if you're in the mood for something destructive, Destructure Among Debris could be the perfect game. Lit Bend the Light is a game where you manipulate mirrors and prisms to reflect and refract different light beams to light up different nodes to complete levels. It has this really nice kind of brassy art style to it, and it reminds me a lot of like the boxes in like the Room series. This is a game that pretty much explains itself once you see the gameplay. So if you're looking for a game that's going to be straightforward, chill out, but still exercise your brain a bit, make sure you check that one out. Title Pending is a comedic style first-person walking sim that's really evocative of like the Stanley Parable or the Beginner's Guide. And like those, it's filled with self-referential humor and it breaks the fourth wall quite a bit. You play as a tester for a new game that's exploring unfinished levels and interacting with glitchy objects. It gives you a behind-the-scenes look at game development, and it's fun to see it kind of poke and prod at the whole process of making a game. So if you're a fan of these meta-style walking sims, this is one to go right along with the others.
Breathe.
Splatter is a chaotic, colorful, out there Winamp Y2K sort of early internet arena shooter that really reminds me a lot of like Cruelty Squad, but it's just more of a straightforward shooter instead of an immersive sim like Cruelty Squad. It's fast-paced and over the top, and if you like what you see, it's gonna be what you get. A wild, irreverent, intense, visually cacophonous kind of arena shooter, and that's pretty cool. Flathead is a horror game that's all about gambling with your life on the line. Basically, it's a whole game built around simple games of over and under. And it's really the presentation here that really amps it up to this whole new level. As you play these high stakes matches, there's also this tension that's building because there's something coming down the hall to you. So kind of like Five Nights at Freddy's, you can turn around and turn the light on and see how close it's getting to you and how much you should speed up. So if you're a fan of games like Buckshot Roulette or Five Nights at Freddy's, definitely make sure you check this one out.
Yeah, you have a skill issue.
Magenta Horizon is a really stunning looking character action game where you play as this stylish Reaper who's chaining combos and doing all this acrobatic combat. If you're a fan of games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, but you want to just play it from a different perspective, this is a really cool game. And like I said, it's all happening while you're looking at this amazingly stunning artwork. So if you're a fan of character action games, do not let Magenta Horizon slip under your radar. Penko Park is basically Pokemon Snap, but without Pokemon. And oddly enough, I found that to be kind of a plus here, because you never knew exactly what adorable creatures are going to be popping up. But if you've never played Pokemon Snap, basically you're in a cart on a track, but you're tasked with taking pictures of all the creatures that you ride by. There are different items and abilities that you get to kind of interact with the landscape as well, and you can cause the different creatures to do different things and really make more interesting dynamic photos. So if you love Pokemon Snap and just want to play a game just like that, make sure you check out Penko Park. Biota is a sci-fi Metroidvania where it basically takes the plot of Aliens and makes it into a Metroidvania. And if that sounds familiar, yeah, they did make one of those for the DS, but this is kind of like a little demake of that, really, in a way. But you're part of a squad that's sent to take out this alien threat, and each member of your team has their own specialties, so you can kind of tailor the way you want to play through it by choosing which character you like to play as the most. Also, as you explore and do all the typical Metroidvania stuff, you'll be finding tons of different color palettes that can change the way the game looks. It has this like Game Boy-ish look to it, but you can change the color palette, so you can tailor it to how you would like to play. This is a pretty good choice, especially if you like the actionier side of Metroidvanias. Then we have Impulsion, which is a super fast-paced parkour kind of game, but it's also kind of like Portal, at least in its traversal mechanics, because you have this device that you can use to shoot these bulbs into the environment that can create these kind of fields that will affect like the gravity or maybe even like slow down time or speed up time within those fields. So you use those to get through and speed run your way through each of these levels. I'd say that this is a really great one if you're into first-person traversal style games. Maybe you're into like the surf maps from Counter-Strike. This would be a good one for you. Next up is a really basic, pretty short, but super solid puzzle platformer called Below the Ocean. And since this game does take place below the ocean, it has these floaty kind of mechanics and feel to the gameplay, but honestly it feels really well done here, and each of the levels is really designed around that floaty feel. You're also going to be using your like oxygen tubes to the oxygen tanks to be kind of like tethers that will allow you to swing around the environments. Make sure you check that one out if you like really solid puzzle platformers. Moving on to Pangalan Cassowary, which is a 3D platformer that has a pretty unique mechanic where you sling your pangolin all over the place, kind of like a golf ball in a mini golf course to traverse. On top of the great mechanics, there's also a really just fantastic art style to this game. I really love its like flat colored look that it has, and this is another short and sweet one, but I think you should check that one out if you want a new kind of take on the 3D platformer. Petal Crash is a throwback puzzle game where you chain together blocks and make giant combos, and it's super satisfying. It has this awesome Game Boy Color aesthetic that it's going for, but really it just all boils down to how great the actual puzzle game mechanics are here, and it really is fun to set up chain reaction sort of combos, and I think this is a great one, especially if you have like a Steam Deck. That Which Gave Chase is a really cool horror game that's going after like the PlayStation 1 aesthetic, and you play as a dog sled musher who is tasked to take this scientist through the Arctic, and it's really cool and creepy about how well it pulls off this atmosphere, especially with its kind of low poly look. This one isn't your typical like jump scare kind of horror game. This is more about the atmosphere and vibes, so if you're looking for a low key like kind of, I don't know, A24 type horror, this could be a great choice for you. Skator Gator 3D is a throwback to the mascot platformers of the PlayStation 1 era. In this game, you're going to be playing as Greenjamin Gator, who uses a skateboard, which leads to this game somewhat resembling like a 3D Sonic game, because you'll be grinding on rails and doing tricks. I'd say this one's worth checking out if you're a fan of like the new revival of like N64, early PlayStation style homages to 3D platformers like the C.A.Brown games, or even something like Yooka-Laylee. Dogworld is a Metroidvania that has a very striking style. It has this sort of 1-bit-ish graphical fidelity to it, where it has this monochromatic art style, and it just looks really cool. But in the game, you'll be playing as this guy who's in this world that's overrun by dogs. And a lot of the game is going to be you trying to uncover what brought the world to the state that it's currently in. So if you're in for a game with a quirky kind of sense of humor, while also still having a dark streak to it, this one could be for you. Bears in Space is a colorful first-person shooter where you play as an astronaut that can Super Saiyan style turn into a bear. It kind of lands in a similar vein to some of the Serious Sam games, if anything. But also it has a streak of, maybe even weirdly enough, Nier Automata, because it has these huge boss battles and fights that are essentially bullet hell battles. We're going to have to be dodging these walls of bullets in a 3D space. So if you're looking for a lighthearted shooter that has a wholesome kind of sense of humor to it, this game might deserve a spot on your wish list. Then we have another sci-fi shooter type game, but it's definitely going for a different thing here, and that is called Sonar Shock, which is a huge homage to the System Shock series. But unlike the System Shock games, this one takes place on a Soviet submarine, and it is haunted. So you're going to be exploring the decaying corridors and fighting terrifying creatures, solving puzzles, and doing all of the sort of immersive sim stuff that you'd expect, but through the lens of a super faithful System Shock homage. This is a great one if you're a fan of immersive sims like me. Frog is a turn-based action platform game, and those are a lot of words that might contradict initially in your head, but what it is a sort of Dandara-esque style movement system where you can dash through the air and stick to the walls, and while you're doing it, since it is turn-based, you're going to be anticipating your enemy's movements and slashing through the air and dashing and trying to take everybody out on the screen. I'd say the coolest part of this is that it slows things down to a turn-based point of view, and that allows you to consider your movement a lot more thoroughly. Just like most other roguelikes though, you're going to be put into these procedurally generated areas and taking out a ton of random enemies with a bunch of different weapons. So if you're looking for a new short time sort of game, Rogue could be cool for you. Hotel Souls is a top-down adventure sort of game where you're searching around this hotel after a super valuable stone that you've been searching for has gone missing from your luggage overnight. You'll be exploring strange rooms of this hotel, solving puzzles, and talking to a ton of really interesting, charming NPCs. I'd say that this is another great one to check out if you're a fan of Undertale. And this isn't going to be the last game in this video if you are. Deep Beyond is a short Indiana Jones-ish sort of narrative adventure story where you play as an explorer who's trying to find the details of her father's disappearance. You'll be exploring ancient wrecks, solving puzzles, and meeting a ton of different characters, but the most interesting thing here is that this is basically an interactive movie. It's gonna only take around 2 hours to complete, and it really has a really striking look to it too. So if you're looking for a solid, single-sitting narrative sort of game, make sure you definitely check out Deep Beyond. Star Stuff is a game that reminds me a lot of like Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker mixed with like a factory sort of building sim where you program a bunch of different robots to complete tasks and solve these puzzles. There's over 150 different puzzles in this game, and I think that this is a really great game for maybe a kid or anybody who's just trying to learn the absolute bare bone basics of what programming is. It's simple if-and sort of logic like that. Grotto is a first-person narrative adventure game where you play as a soothsayer who is trapped in this mysterious cave, but you can look out through the cracks at the night sky and see different constellations, and by doing so you're faced with these moral dilemmas, and you can make really impactful choices on which way the story goes. In addition to that, it has a really great soundtrack that really immerses you into this kind of scenario, while also having amazing artwork that reminds me a lot of the work of like Mike Mignola from, Hellboy fame. So if you're looking for a game that has a lot of branching choices in its storytelling, make sure you check out Grotto. Next up is a game called Pool, and it is a really awesome take on the big Suika game style craze that we've been hit with, but this is one of the best ones that I've played. So what you're going to be doing is it's basically like a billiards table, and each of the balls, if you're familiar with Suika game, if you have similar objects, they combine and create the next level in object. So it becomes about creating the biggest object in this hierarchy of objects. But the end game here is that once you get too many balls on the table, then your run is over. Mechanically, this one's just really fun to have these chain reactions because unlike Suika game, things are like actively moving around on the table because things move around all the time. So if you're looking for a new great take on the Suika game formula, make sure you check out Pool. Refresh is this nice, heartwarming 3D platformer that has a underlying message about environmentalism. Basically, you're a robot in this small town and your job is to help rebuild after a horrible storm came through and really just kind of flattened the town. So what you're going to do is help out all of these different villagers with these tasks to bring back the town to a new high. It's got a really great relaxing atmosphere and really nice cute visuals, so if you're looking for a nice cozy 3D platformer, make sure you check out Refresh. Moving on to Clea, which is pretty much the opposite of the previous game, where it's this spooky anime-styled survival horror game. It just happens to take place from a side view perspective, so it's like Clock Tower in that way. But besides the perspective, it's going to be doing the typical kind of Resident Evil-y kind of stuff you'd expect, where you're searching this mansion and you're getting objects to unlock doors and, you know, the whole lock and key system. It's pretty much what all survival horror games do. But yeah, as you're carrying all that sort of stuff out, there's these creepy like servants to the house that are trying to hunt you down, so you're gonna have to try to avoid them. This one could be a great one if you're looking for a new perspective on the survival horror genre. Next up is Mr. Sun's Hatbox, and at first glance this looks like a pretty straightforward puzzle platformer, but it's actually super inspired by Metal Gear Solid 5 of all games. The plot is that you're playing as this guy who is tasked with delivering a hatbox to Mr. Sun, and it ends up getting lifted off you and you have to get it back, because you're contractually obligated to. And that is the framework for a bunch of these different sneaking missions. And as you do that, just like Metal Gear Solid 5, you're going to be running into a ton of different enemies, and you'll be able to recruit them to your cause and kind of build up this Mother Base style outfit out of all of these different ragtag types of people with their own attributes and special abilities. There's even a really direct take on like the Fulton system of all things. As a huge fan of stealth games and increasingly of 2D stealth games, this is one that has a lot more depth than it may first look like.
Can you hear me? The shadows are dangerous.
Alright, now I'll just say right now that Light Matter is one of my favorite games in this whole video. It is a first-person puzzle game in the style like Portal, like a lot of games in this video, but the premise is that you're in this facility where this horrible accident has happened, which has transformed all of the darkness and shadow into this sort of like lava-style viscous fluid that will consume you whole if you step into it. So the whole game is built around you using these different types of lights and lasers to illuminate the area to make a path so you can make it through the game. And as you do so, just like Portal, there's going to be this person who's narrating over the intercoms at you. In this case, it's the CEO of this corporation who is trying to figure out what you're even doing in the building in the first place. But yeah, this is one that is just excellent top to bottom, and I think that it's a total shame that this hasn't been discovered by more people. Okay, next up is another one that is a real standout on this whole list, but it's Zetzillions. It's this sci-fi roguelike deck building game that has a lot of inspiration from anime like Gurren Lagann. The premise here is that you're commanding a ragtag crew of space pirates to conquer planets and build up a galactic empire of your own. But on top of this really awesome stylistic take, it also is just an excellent card game, and I think that its versatility to its card system is super stand out. First of all, you can use each card in a bunch of different ways, so it adds a lot of variety just implicitly there. But if you don't like any of the cards you have, there's ways to combine them and fuse cards into new, awesome, more useful cards. So if you're a big Slay the Spire person, this is one that you definitely need to check out.
Welcome aboard, Kami!
Moving on to Killbug, it is a fast-paced first-person arena shooter where you slash and shoot your way through endless waves of insects. The feather in this one's cap is totally its fluid movement mechanics and amazing combat. You're going to be let loose in this arena that you're going to get really familiar with, where you have a ton of different ways of taking out these endless waves of creepy crawlies. There's so much verticality and strategy that comes with that, where it becomes about learning how to counter different types of bugs. This is one that at first glance doesn't seem to have too much content to it because it's just this one arena, but the amount of juice that you can kind of squeeze out of that just one arena and learning how to figure out the paths and the ways to navigate this area, it really has quite a substantial amount to its learning curve. Dad Quest is this really weird 2D platforming game that has some really strong Metroidvania influence to its structure. So you play as a dad, and you use your child as a weapon. Whether that is to bludgeon or to toss through the air like a football, you use your kid as your weapon, and you're going to be upgrading your kid to gain these new abilities and attributes that will help you on your journey. So obviously it's a offbeat, funny kind of thing, but also it's just a solid game on top of that. So if you want a game that doesn't take itself too seriously and focuses on this oddly charming bond between parent and child, make sure you check that one out. Dross is a top-down adventure game in the style of top-down Zelda, where you play as this warrior who is really seriously injured until this slime comes along to help him out and revive him, and that's going to be the gimmick of this game, where you'll be able to switch between the warrior character, who kind of acts like Link in a traditional Zelda game, and this goo character who can go through pipes and access areas that you can't as the warrior. And as you play, you're going to be ascending this tower full of puzzles and secrets, so it's basically this one giant dungeon that has a lot of variety to it actually. This is one of those just super solid Zelda style games, and it's a shame this one is overlooked as much as it is. Racken Slay is another pool-style game, but this time it's a roguelike. The gist is that on each stage, you're going to be put onto each of these different billiards tables, and there's going to be a bunch of different enemy balls. And the more enemy balls that are still on the table after you're out of your turns, the more damage you're going to take for your overall run. And as you might expect, just like most other roguelikes, in between each of the stages, you'll be able to pick from a bunch of different perks and really change the way that your run goes. And then in addition to that, there's a ton of different types of enemy balls that have their own different types of attributes. So if you want to play a really great physics-based roguelike, make sure you totally check out Racken Slay. Hellblusser is another roguelike, but this time it's a first-person dungeon crawler where you play as a young prince who can suck up fire from the environment and expel it back out towards the enemies. This is one from Sock Pop Collective, who makes a ton of different indie games that typically have a small scale to them, and this is no different. But I had a really good time, although brief, with this one because of its really striking art style, and I really liked actually how hard this is. It was a pretty hard dungeon crawler. It really makes you regret all the hits you take. Moving on to yet another Metroidvania. I'm going to be mentioning a lot of them in this video because I'm a big fan of the genre, so buckle in for that. But the Shadow King is a micro Metroidvania that was built for the Pico 8 actually, and is now available on Steam. Overall, this will take like a half an hour to an hour to beat, but it's just a straight focused blast of pure Metroidvania game design, and it's a really nice snack if you're looking for it. Decimate Drive is a first-person horror game where you're tasked with making your way through this city that is filled with these cars that are just programmed to come right after you. So it's kind of like a horror take on Frogger mixed with like Maximum Overdrive. This is one that is pretty bare bones, honestly, but it still is really fun to just try to avoid the cars and make your way to the end of each level. Then we have another car game, but this is a take that is more similar to something like Tony Hawk, and that is Wrecked High Octane Stunts. But yeah, like I said, this is a combination of something that's similar to Tony Hawk, but with like the feel of Rocket League. You're going to be driving around the arena, and it's going to be giving you different tasks to complete under a strict time limit. And that's stuff like performing tricks and completing combos. There's also multiplayer in this one, but I haven't played that myself yet. But I think this is a really fun, really good feeling game, especially if you love the feel of Rocket League. Next up is another first-person puzzle game. This one is called Straw Heart, and it kind of has like a cult-like theme to it, where this mysterious scarecrow is commanding you to complete these puzzles with a goal of building up a cult. So if you're looking for a kind of Halloween-y take on the Portal-style formula, make sure you check out Straw Heart. Next up is another light-hearted take on spooky vibes, and that is Sunshine Manor, which is this top-down Zelda-style game, kind of similar to a few that I've already mentioned in this video, but it has this really awesome pixel art and this 80s horror movie vibe. So if you want a Undertale-style game with a bunch of spooky, charming NPCs that doesn't take itself too seriously, this is a great choice.
Seeking refuge in the forsaken lands of Luna Nova. I have protected our village from the creatures that would devour us.
Alright, and I guess we're in this strange little Halloween zone, which I didn't intend to be, but here we are. Harvest Hunt, a first-person horror game, but with a unique deck-building twist, where you can pick up these different cards and use these cards to influence the area and how you interact with this stalker-type enemy. This is another one with a really great atmosphere to it, and a really cool cel-shaded-y, pencil-shaded kind of look to its art. And we're on to Tagline, which is a high-speed parkour-style arena shooter that really owes a lot to Jet Set Radio in its vibes. You're going to be parkouring your way through these different levels, while also sucking color out of the environment, which effectively gives you new weapons to take down all of these different enemies that are trying to stop you on your graffiti parkour runs. So if you're looking for a game with a blast of color and style to it, this is one that you definitely should take a look at. Then we have It's a Wrap, which is a really unique take on a 2D platformer that mixes in a non-linear editing suite. And as someone who obviously spends a lot of time behind a non-linear editing suite, this video especially, it's a really cool way to interact with a video game. In short, you're going to be doing all of these different movie-themed levels, but in each of the levels, there's different props and obstacles that you can manipulate by shifting them around on the editing timeline. So it's all going to be about timing these different props and obstacles so that they fall apart in the most thrilling way while keeping you actually safe from danger. So if you're looking for a great game to maybe even introduce yourself to the concept of video editing in a way, this is a really charming game. Paradise Marsh is this really cozy, relaxing adventure game set in this beautiful wetland. You'll be set free to explore the environment, catch bugs, and meet a bunch of charming little characters, but you're going to be piecing together this mystery that is all about missing stars. This is one of those games that is just about vibes, and it has really stunning visuals and a really great soundtrack. So if you're looking for a charming little game to escape everyday life to, make sure you at least add that one to your wishlist. Duel On Board is a really simple, straightforward local multiplayer game where 2 players go head-to-head as pirates on a pirate ship. So if you're like me and love games like Nidhogg for their simplicity and straight head-to-head gameplay, this game can evoke those high tense moments. It's got super simple pick up and play controls, but there's a lot of little variables that can be added into each match to spice things up. So if you want to try out a new game next time you have a game night with your friends, check out Duel On Board. Girl Genius Adventures in Castle Herodine is a 3D action platform game that is based on a really beloved webcomic series. But for me, somebody who's not familiar with that webcomic, this game just evokes a lot of classic GameCube, PlayStation 2 era platformers, kind of like the Maximo games or maybe even a little bit of Wind Waker. But if you have a lot of nostalgia for that era, this game has you doing puzzles and battling enemies, and it's just a really charming little platformer. So if you're like me and you're looking for a nice throwback to your childhood, Girl Genius Adventures in Castle Herodine could have your back. Search Party is a top-down pixel art survival horror game where you're tasked with searching for your missing brother in a creepy house. And like most survival horror games, you're going to be solving puzzles and taking items and doing things that you would expect while also evading this stalker enemy. Graphically, this one reminds me a lot of like Death Road to Canada, but it has a lot more tension than that. This is a great one if you want a classic take on survival horror through the lens of a pixel art game. Airhead is a unique and charming Metroidvania where you play as this small creature that carries around this giant inflatable head. You can detach the head to solve puzzles, and you can inflate it to float into the air. This one has an offbeat tone to it, but it's also just a charming, strange, kind of ambient and ominous vibe. So add that one to your wish list if you want a great underrated Metroidvania. Kon Crypt is a Game Boy Color style dungeon crawler, though in this game you're playing as Death himself, who is exploring this mysterious crypt, but the extra unique hook here is that you have the ability to possess different enemies and use their unique abilities. So if you want a gothic take on Link's Awakening, check out Kon Crypt. Escape Mistwood Mansion is a really fun first-person escape room game. And like other escape room games, you're going to be put into these environments and you have to search around and figure out the different steps to escape. This is a great one because it's a whole mansion, so you have a bunch of little distinct rooms that have their own theming with their own puzzle mechanics. Add this one to your wish list if you're looking for a really polished, awesome way to spend an afternoon. The Amazing Crackpots Club is a wild multiplayer game where it kind of is like a game of Pong mixed with Smash Brothers and Lethal League. You're going to be going head to head, smashing this ball back and forth, and trying to guard it from smashing into the vial that's behind you. This is one of the few in this video that's still in early access, but there's already a ton of different characters and stages, and just the core gameplay here is very, very good. Moving on to Tower, which is a top-down shooter that has a really nice low-key pixel art vibe. And like the title might suggest, you're going to be tasked with ascending a tower. In doing so, it's going to be a bullet hell shoot 'em up. This is a nice shorty if you're looking for a twin-stick shooter that's not going to be a roguelike, like the genre has typically become recently. Sunshine Heavy Industries is a puzzle game where you design and build a ton of different spaceships to complete different tasks. So imagine like the building systems in Tears of the Kingdom or Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, but it's in a 2D plane. I absolutely love when games focus on emphasizing the player's creativity to solve problems their own way, and this is a game that perfectly fits into that category. On top of the excellent base toolbox mechanics here, there's also a ton of quirky characters that will have you doing these little tasks for them. So if you're looking for a puzzle game that gives you a lot of freedom on how you're going to solve the puzzles, check that one out. Leap Year is a platform game that has some Metroidvania structure to it, but mostly it's just about avoiding death. And death comes quite often because you're going to be dying every time you fall from a height that's like higher than 2 blocks high. This is one where everything has been seemingly stripped away. It has a very simple art style, and the mechanics are just super straightforward. So if you're looking for a simple, whimsical game, check out Leap Year. "24 Killers" is a comedic RPG game that's paying huge tribute to games like Moon Remix RPG or other games from Love the Lick. And like a lot of those games, you're going to be tasked with accomplishing specific tasks throughout each day. There's super offbeat, strange characters, and the tasks they're going to have you doing are also pretty odd. The thing that sets this game apart from games like Moon the most is probably its transformation mechanic, where you can transform into different creatures to overcome different challenges. So if you're looking for a quirky, really weird, charming adventure game, this is a real standout. Angry Arrows is a top-down shooter with a focus on really satisfying one-shot kills. In the single-player and co-op modes, it's going to be about rescuing hostages, but really, this game really shines in its competitive multiplayer because it's so much fun to just barely peek around a corner and shoot a lethal one-shot arrow across the level to a friend. So if you're looking for a local multiplayer game that is super simple to get into, but can create a ton of tension, check out Angry Arrows. Aura of Worlds is another game that's on this list, and I think it's criminal that it's here because it's such a well-made, procedurally generated roguelike game that reminds me a bit of Noita, even if it doesn't have quite as much systemic stuff going on. This game is very systemic in using your environment against the threats that you come up against. I think because this game is so polished looking outright, you wouldn't expect how much systemic stuff is actually happening under the hood here. So if you're a fan of games like Noita or Spelunky, make sure you give this one a look. The Tartarus Key is a PlayStation 1 style throwback to games like Resident Evil, but this time it's pretty much just story and puzzle focused. You're tasked with escaping this mysterious mansion, but you're not alone. There's a lot of NPCs that are telling their own stories, and it really is interesting to see where each character is coming from and how they ended up in the situation that they're in. Really, plot-wise, it's pretty similar to like Saw because you find yourself trapped here and it's filled with puzzles and traps that you have to figure out and survive. So if you want a cool mix of PS1 era Resident Evil and Saw, check out the Tartarus Key. Micro Mages is a new homebrew NES game that actually is released on Steam, and it's just a super great polished platformer. You can play through this solo, but it's really about playing it with your friends co-op. Your goal is going to be to ascend up these different levels to reach the end, and the game feel is actually really great because you'll be able to do wall jumps and get special abilities as you find them in the levels. Also, while you're playing in co-op, you'll be kind of competing as well to get the best score in each level. So I recommend checking that one out if you're looking for a throwback style game that's actually super polished. Kickbasters is a fast-paced first-person parkour game, and it is really cool with its acrobatic movement. Like other parkour games, you're going to be running around, jumping, and sliding, but you'll also be kicking your way through this one. And since that's the mechanic the whole game's really based around, it feels great when you make that impact. In addition to the typical stuff while racing through, you'll also be able to swing through the air kind of like Spider-Man, and it is another fantastic feeling gameplay mechanic. So if you're into speed games like Siam Speedrunners from Hell, make sure you give Kickbasters a shot. Then we have Splody, which is another fast-paced platformer, but this time you're going to be using explosions to propel yourself through the air. It's kind of like Explosion Man from the Xbox Live Arcade days, but it's a lot more about using the physics to get you to where you need to go. So give that one a look if you like physics-based, chaotic speed games. Ad Infernum is a first-person survival horror game that actually has combat, unlike a lot of the other survival horror games in this video. If you're familiar with the more recent first-person Resident Evil games like Resident Evil 7 and 8, then you kind of know what you're getting into with this one. On top of the typical Resident Evil style stuff though, there's also a level of psychological horror to this one. So give that one a look if you can't wait until the next Resident Evil game. Spirits Abyss is another roguelike game, but just look at this one. It's like incredible looking. All of the developers' games kind of have this very distinct, vibrant look to it, and this is a really great one. It also has a streak of Noida to it because it has destructible environments in a roguelike game, and I just really love the way this one looks. And if you're looking for a stylish roguelike to give a go, check out Spirits Abyss.
Hired muscle in a mining up before. What are they so worried about?
There may be hope after all.
Alright, now we're to Raw Metal, which was the very first game that I talked about in this underrated game series, and it's a really cool, striking action stealth game. It's kind of like if you mixed Sifu for its combat, mixed with Metal Gear Solid for its stealth-like structure. Your goal in this one is to infiltrate a mining facility on this distant planet, and you're going to have to sneak past a ton of guards, and you're going to use your gadgets to do so. But when all else fails, you're going to get into a pretty intense match of fisticuffs. So if you're looking for a stealth game that also allows you to do some really intense combos, give Raw Metal a good look.
You don't stand a chance!
Draft of Darkness is a deck-building roguelike game, but this time it has this grungy horror aesthetic to it. So if you're familiar with roguelike deck builders that have an element of building up a party, you're going to be pretty familiar with this. It just happens to have this horror aesthetic, which makes it pretty unique. So if you think that there's not enough grunge in your roguelike deck builders, Draft of Darkness is here to fill that void. Bat Boy is a Mega Man influenced platform throwback game that has a melee focus to it. You'll be wielding your baseball bat instead of a Mega Buster, so it sort of adds a new take on this sort of game. But besides that, you're going to be going up against a ton of bosses with a great soundtrack like you might expect, and unlocking a bunch of cool power-ups. So if you want a more melee take on the Mega Man franchise, check out Bat Boy. The Multimedium is a pretty laid-back platformer in the vein of like Limbo, but with a less dire vibe to it. The cool thing about this one is that you're going to be slipping between different dimensions, and each dimension you go to has its own unique art style to it. So you're going to be exploring a multiverse of hand-drawn and painted worlds that are all very distinct from each other. So if you're a fan of mixed media like me, make sure you check that one out. Then we have Frog Song, a really charming Zelda-style adventure game where you play as this little frog who's on a heroic little quest. And like in most of these kind of games, you're going to be talking to quirky characters and exploring the world. It's just this time everything's been shrunk down to the scale of a frog, so you're going to be battling bugs and collecting trinkets. It's got this great hand-drawn 2D art, and it's just a heartfelt story. Check that one out if you're looking for a cozy Zelda-style game. Paper Ball is an indie take on Super Monkey Ball, and it really pulls it off super well. You navigate through these tricky levels as this balled up piece of paper, and it's just a really good take on the Monkey Ball formula. There are over 150 unique levels, and that's not even including the DLC. Since this is a love letter from Monkey Ball fans, it's got all the stuff that you'd probably want if you're big into that franchise. So if you're a fan of ball rolling games, make sure that one lands on your wish list. Wave Break is a Tony Hawk-inspired game, but it replaces the skateboards with boats, and it adds shooter elements even. So you're going to be effectively skating around these different arenas, while also blasting away at your competitors. As for its aesthetic vibes, it's going for this neon-soaked 80s Miami Vice kind of thing. So fans of Tony Hawk who are starved for more, make sure you check this one out. UFO, Unidentified Falling Objects, is a combination of a platforming game and a puzzle game. You play as this little character that's on the screen, and you're gonna have to dodge falling objects while you also rack up combos. It's fast-paced, and the actual puzzle mechanics here are great too because it's designed in a way that it creates cascading combos. It's also got this awesome synthwave soundtrack, so if you're into that sort of thing, it adds great vibes to the whole experience. So if you want an easy-to-learn, hard-to-master kind of puzzle game, check this one out. Stop Dead is a fast-paced, gravity-defying game that's kind of like a gravity gun arena shooter, and it's really cool. But in this case, you're using your telekinetic abilities to lift objects and fling them at enemies. So whether you're a fan of fast-paced action games or just really like a good physics sandbox, make sure you check out Stop Dead. Vivid Lope is an arcade-style game, but it's really going for the Dreamcast-era aesthetic. You're going to be covering stages in specific colors to clear them away, so it's kind of like Splatoon-y in that way, but really here it's all about this Y2K vibe you get. And if you played games like Choo Choo Rocket, it definitely has the same sort of appeal. So if you're like me, a millennial who likes to sometimes dive back into some nostalgic comfort, make sure you give that one a good look. Civil Engineering is a really janky game at first glance, and it is in practice as well, but the jank here is really what is the appeal. You play as a civil engineer, and your goal is to poke and prod at these roads and make sure traffic gets to where it needs to be getting. It's sort of like those bridge building games, but in a 3D space, and fun is the #1 thing here over presentation. So you're going to be building these insane roads that flip cars through the air to their destinations. And like I've said a few times in this video, I just love it when a game gives you a creative sandbox to solve problems your own way. So if you're looking to flex your city planner muscles in a weird, chaotic way, make sure you check out Civil Engineering. Master Key is a minimalist, monochrome Zelda-style game that just delivers a super polished experience while also keeping its scope in check. So you have dungeons to explore, puzzles to solve, and keys to collect, so it's exactly what's on the tin. So add that one to the pile of Zelda-style games from this video that are just super polished and sadly underrated. Revenge of the Colon is a game that is a super bizarre, disgusting, off-putting experience, though that in itself can be fun from time to time. You play as a colonoscopist, and you have to perform 5 different colonoscopies, and each time you do so, it's going to be more horrors beyond human comprehension. So if you're not above gross out humor and want to play something that is super weird, Revenge of the Colon is here for you. Glyph is a physics-based 3D platformer where you play as this little mech scarab, but it's going to be a lot of like ball rolling type gameplay mixed with 3D platforming. So you'll be rolling and jumping and gliding through the air to get your way through these different levels. So if you want a mix of Monkey Ball and a more traditional 3D platformer, give that one a look. Curse Crackers For Whom the Bell Tolls is a fast-paced, acrobatic platformer, and it has a Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Color even presentation to it. You'll be leaping, bouncing, and fighting a ton of different enemies, but I really think this game just comes completely together because of its amazing art design. There's tons of different secrets to find, and I'd say check this one out if you're a Sonic fan or maybe even like a Shantae fan.
Now they have awakened me.
Eremon's Shadow Legacy is a 3D stealth game that reminds me a lot of the Origami series. You'll be able to use your shadow powers to effectively do like a Splatoon style diving into the darkness. It's set in a pretty distinct futuristic dystopia that still carries forward a lot of Eastern tradition. So if you like stealth games that allow you to choose between lethal and non-lethal approaches, really check this one out.
They will not drag me into their light.
Garlic is a comedic platformer that's kind of like a mix of Super Meat Boy and Celeste. But this is yet another game on this list. I'm sure you can tell that a lot of the games on this video are really big swings at strong stylistic choices, and that's always something that catches my eye. And this game is no different. There's obviously so many games out there that you need to stand out in some way. It's not enough to just have super tight controls and really well designed levels anymore. You also just have to have something that makes your game pop, and this game really has that in spades. So if you want to play a game as this strange little lustful garlic man, definitely make sure you check that one out. Mixoluma is a puzzle game that is really about creating chain reactions by dropping blocks into this diamond-shaped well. And at this point, I'm sure that you've noticed that that's another thing for me, is when puzzle games allow you to set up and create huge chain reactions. It just sets off fireworks in my brain. This is one that is just super simple, but it is going to be a satisfying experience as soon as you set one of those chain reactions off. You Are Peter Shorts is a really odd Metroidvania game where you control Peter, who has been kidnapped by a secret agency and cloned into a ton of different abominations. So it's either your goal to free or take these guys out. On top of the full single-player campaign, there's also a really chaotic kind of Smash Brothers arena-style fighting game where you play as all of these different Peters. So yeah, if you're looking for another offbeat, amazing-looking game that is sadly underlooked, You Are Peter Shorts is sitting there waiting for you. Mysteries Under Lake Ophelia is a fishing game that has some strange depth to it, quite literally and figuratively. Most of the game is a pretty serene, just fishing sim, but really the depth here is the lake seems to go a lot deeper than you expect. And to be able to fish deeper, you're going to need new gear to allow you to reach those unseen depths. And once you get deeper, who knows what you'll find down there. This is one that has maybe a bit of a dark turn, but it's also a really great game that preys on your curiosity. So if you're looking to find out what the mysteries are under Lake Ophelia, make sure you check it out. After Dream is a psychological horror game. It's kind of like a 2D pixel art take on something like Silent Hill. And it really is, because it also does a blending of what is real and what is like a dream state. It has a really striking art style because it's this pixel art presentation, but there's also this nice like bokeh effect that kind of softens the image on the screen, and it really makes this game stand out amongst the sea of other games on Steam. Pompous and Celine: The Maze of Demons is an 8-bit Metroidvania game, but really it's a spiritual successor to Konami's The Maze of Gallius. But in addition to the pedigree that it's calling upon, it's also a co-op Metroidvania, and I think that that is really what makes this one stand out so much. You and a friend are going to be able to explore this castle together and find items and take out bosses together, and I think that that's a really neat take on the Metroidvania genre. So if you're looking to take on one of my favorite genres with a friend, make sure you give that one a look. Mothman 1966 is a pixel art visual novel that is really striking, just like a lot of the games. I know I keep wearing myself out, saying the same things over and over again, but look at this. This is incredible looking. I love the dithering and the pixel art on this, and it just looks so great. It kind of reminds me of like a PC-88 game, or maybe even some of the rare times that there were point-and-click adventures that were ported to the NES. But the story here takes place in the 1960s, and it surrounds the Mothman conspiracy, one of my favorite conspiracy theories and fun things to just kind of ruminate on. But if there's one thing here besides Mothman Conspiracies, the movie, that this is similar to, it's honestly very X-Files. So if you want some noir-like tones mixed with the Men in Black, this is a really cool game. And the devs of this even have a ton of other interactive fiction games like this in a series that are pretty similar, so if you like this, there's definitely more where this came from. Lodge Arc Grimoire is a take on Picross, but it has this really nice fantasy theming that just kind of gives a whole atmosphere to the usually pretty sterile genre. There's over 250 puzzles here, and if you're a big Picross fan and haven't tried this one out, make sure you do. Dreamwild is a avant-garde first-person shooter with this early CG aesthetic, and it's set in these ethereal dreamscapes, where you used fast-paced motion to leap and soar through these arena shooter battles. The movement is super fluid here, and it's all about low-gravity physics, so this is also one that has a bit of the Counter-Strike surf map genes in it. So if you're looking for a really odd take on the movement shooter, you should give that one a good look. Biomorph is one of the most underrated games of 2024, and I think it's a total shame that people don't seem to know about this one. It's an incredible Metroidvania where you have the ability to transform into different enemies and use their abilities to overcome obstacles. On top of that, it is also just incredibly well animated, and there's really beautiful cutscenes, and it's just so incredibly polished, and I don't know why nobody is talking about this game. So definitely check that one out. That would probably make it into like a top 10 if I had to make this whole video into one. But really, that one just needs more eyes on it. Super Skelemania is a short but sweet Metroidvania where you play as a little skeleton, and I'm a sucker for little skeletons. But when I first started playing this, I was like a little hesitant to keep going because it starts off pretty slow. And I'm sure as you can tell by the games that I've selected so far, I like fast-paced games. But that's actually the subversion that this game does over the course of its runtime. You'll gain abilities to leap and roll and headbutt and just truck through the environment. So if you want another quick, like hour-long Metroidvania, I suggest giving that one a shot. Wand Wars is a local multiplayer game that is just super chaotic and very fun. You all play as wizards on brooms and you battle each other to come out on top, but what you're going to be competing in changes constantly through tons of different game modes. But at its core, it's all about flying around and casting spells, and it is just a really fun time. I'd say this is another good one for your next game night with friends because it's easy to learn and hard to master. White Lavender is a short, charming Souls-like where you play as a bug who's on a quest to brew tea. So you'll explore this vibrant, really stylish world while dodge rolling and taking out enemies. At its core, it's a pretty simple and faithful Souls-like game, but it has so much unique character to it that typically doesn't end up being put into Souls-like games like this. So if you want to play a difficult, dodge rolling kind of game, but you want it to be not so dire, make sure you check that one out. Wally and the Fantastic Predators is a dual joystick bullet hell roguelike game. That's another game that's super charming and has a nice quirky aesthetic while also not holding back on its difficulty. So just like other games in this genre like Binding of Isaac, you'll be getting perks and changing your runs and just having something new to experience every time you restart. So check that one out if you want to give Binding of Isaac a break. Cosmic Collapse is my absolute favorite Suika style game. It takes the basics of Suika game where you drop things into a well and they combine to create bigger things within a hierarchy, but in this case you're going to be combining planets and like celestial entities, and as you play you get the ability to Death Star style destroy planets that are blocking and clogging up your well. And I'd say that one gameplay change there really adds a lot of longevity to your runs and makes this super addictive. It's a game that I've put countless hours into on my Steam Deck, and I absolutely cannot recommend this one enough. Janitor Bleeds is a first-person horror game set in an arcade, but it has a really unique twist where you can actually play one of the games, and by doing so, it impacts the world outside of the arcade cabinet. It also has a really great throwback nostalgic vibe. Make sure you play that one if you're looking for a game that takes the first-person horror genre, which is pretty well trodden at this point, and does something unique with it. Super 56 is if you took WarioWare and you just sharpened its edge just a little bit. Another thing that sets this game apart though is you play all of the minigames with just one button, so it's even easier to get on the same page as whatever game comes your way. This one comes from the developers of the cult favorite Nippon Marathon, so if you want a really cheap game that is super offbeat and another microgame collection, that is a really great one. Bug Academy is a physics-based game where you control a swarm of bugs and complete tasks. It's one of these physics-based kind of chaotic meme-ish games, but I don't mean that really in a bad way. It just kind of fills a similar void as something like maybe Goat Simulator, but this time you're just in a 2D plane. You'll be picking up large objects as this swarm and flying them around to different places, and it's just a charming, chaotic sort of game. Ugly is a hand-drawn puzzle platformer that has a really creepy vibe to it. It sort of reminds me of Braid because a lot of the game is built around a core mechanic, in this case being a mirror, which allows you to play through different parts of levels at the same time doing different things. It's a bit of patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. Give that one a shot if you want a creepy little puzzle platformer. Dungeon Deathball is a turn-based tactical roguelike that's like a death sport mixed with Into the Breach. You lead a team of prisoners into this brutal gladiatorial sport, and each turn you take high-stakes gambles that allow you to strategize and take out the opposite team. So if you like turn-based tactical sorts of games, but you want it to have a bit of a darkly humorous twist, this one definitely deserves your attention. Promenade is a polished 2D platformer, and I think that this one's a shame that not that many people know about this one, because it reminds me of something that would come out of like Nintendo, or maybe even like those 2D Rayman games. You explore vibrant worlds and solve puzzles, while also meeting a cast of endearing characters. So if you just want a nice, delightful little game that for some reason has gone under the radar, give this one a look.
Researchers such as Professor Patrick Moore are trying to figure out if there is life after death.
An English Haunting is a spooky point-and-click adventure game where you play as a professor and he investigates the supernatural to see what's legit and what's not. It takes place in the Victorian era and you'll encounter historical figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini. So if you like point-and-click adventure games and you like a bit of the paranormal, check this one out. Frog Monster is a first-person Metroidvania game that's set in a really colorful, swampy world. You play as a frog with a variety of weapons and abilities, and you just do a Metroid Prime. Obviously, this isn't quite on the level of Metroid Prime, but this still goes for it, and it's in the same ballpark. So if you want a kind of silly take on that kind of game, this game could be for you. Shippo is another Metroidvania, but this time it's from the traditional side view perspective. The hook to this one is that you play as a shape-shifting creature, and you have to explore this strange planet using these different things you can transform into. So add that one to the pile of other Metroidvanias I've talked about in this video. Apple Slash is a short adventure game where you defend a swamp from creatures using this crazy powerful sword. Basically, you're going to just be flailing all over the place, and it is oddly satisfying. On top of that, I really like the atmosphere to this, and it's really intense color choices that make this game really stand out. So if you want a little bit more chaos, there's that one for you. Robodunk is a roguelike basketball game that's basically like Gundam meets NBA Jam. It's a fast-paced, over-the-top take on basketball, and you're going to be slam dunking quite a bit. Beyond the typical basketball though, there's tons of different things that you can do to upgrade your team and swap out parts, so it's got a little bit of custom robo in there too. So whether you're playing this solo or with friends, Robodunk is super impressive. Trust Bashers is a Game Boy Color style, say it with me, Metroidvania game, but you play as a bat-wielding character who goes up against a ton of different cryptids. So basically, this is them reading my dream journal and making a game out of it. But yeah, another one for the pile, I guess.
The cache will be cleared out. Congratulations. New 1 bits and 0 bits will be put in their proper order.
Are you joking? You're not even programmed to...
Next up is Backfire Wall, which is a comedic first-person adventure game that's going for a little bit of a Stanley Parable sort of thing, where you are a piece of software that's inside of a smartphone, and the piece of software that you are is the update assistant. But you're going to encounter a lot of different pieces of software that don't necessarily want to be made obsolete, so it's on your shoulders to help them out. If I were to boil this down, I'd say it's like the Stanley Parable by way of Tron meets Inside Out. Alright, we're close to the end now. There are 3 games left in the video, but here we go. This one is Reveal, which is a first-person horror game that's set in a really creepy 1960s circus, and it has a ton of mind-bending psychological horror and really creative environments that you're going to be exploring. Make sure you give that one a shot if you like twisted family tales. Then we have Anode Heart, which is an RPG where you tame virtual creatures and recover your lost memories. It's a nostalgic throwback to stuff like Digimon World, I'd say mostly, but also a little bit of Pokemon, obviously. But it has all of the monster collecting mechanics and really awesome pixel art, so if you're a fan of this genre, make sure you don't let Anode Heart slip you by. Alright, and then we have the final game in the video. We have made it, and it is Berserk Boy, a GBA-style Mega Man Zero influenced platformer. But that might sell this actually a little bit short, because you're going to be slashing and jumping and doing like a ton of acrobatic high-speed movement, which you couldn't do in the Mega Man Zero games to this degree. So I'd say you should probably check this one out, even if you're not a huge Mega Man Zero fan specifically. It's just a really awesome throwback to all of the games in the Mega Man franchise. Alright, and thank you guys for watching this video. It has been a ridiculous amount of work to get this video done. I definitely bit off way more than I could chew. Well, I guess I chewed it, but it just was a lot of work to do so. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked the video, do all the YouTube-y stuff. I would really appreciate it so much. A few of my videos, my last few videos actually, have been underperforming, so this video was kind of a bit of a Hail Mary, I guess, to try to make something that was a bit longer, and hopefully that will please the powers that be. But yeah, if you like this video, I have a ton of other videos that aren't part of the underrated game series, so you're not going to see much repeat there. If you like this, you probably like all that stuff too. But yeah, I genuinely appreciate it, especially if you managed to make it all the way through it. It's like watching a feature film. Like, geez, oh man, thank you guys so much. And yeah, just watching this far was enough for me. I appreciate it so much. Have a good one, and thank you for watching.